continued, and all residents have befallen some form of tragedy. There were those who died prematurely. One who was murdered, and in 1960 a fire badly damaged the structure and meant it had to be fully rebuilt. The last owner died in 1985, and without any heirs he donated the property to the National Trust, who run regular tours around the place for those wanting to experience a piece of the English countryside, and of course for visitors wanting their own chance to see the ghostly happenings. Number 6. Banff Springs Hotel, Canada. The Banff Springs Hotel in Fairmont, Canada is one of the most famous haunted places in North America, and there are a number of legends about this place that attract ghost hunters from around the world. In 1926, after a small fire that broke out in the hotel, it was discovered that the contractor who had built the hotel had mistakenly included a small room with no windows or doors, and not even the hotel owner knew about it. Soon after its discovery, ghosts were seen walking in and out of it, which makes you wonder why it was there in the first place, and if it had ever been used for something.
Room 873 is gone.
If 873 is your lucky number, then unfortunately you won't be able to stay in this room at the hotel, because legend has it that a family was brutally murdered in there. And because subsequent guests experienced such vivid paranormal activity, the owners bricked up the door to look like the rest of the hallway. Other stories include the ghost of a former bellman who often walks through the hotel, strange noises that come from the bridal suite, even when it's empty, and a bartender who occasionally appears when there are large groups waiting for drinks. Number 5. The Stanley Hotel, Colorado. If you've watched or read The Shining and were freaked out by the story, then you have the Stanley Hotel in Colorado to blame. Built in a location with stunning views across the Rocky Mountains, strange occurrences have been reported ever since an accident that happened in 1911. Despite opening as one of the first hotels in the world to be powered by purely electricity, the power supply had proved to be unreliable, so the decision was made to install gas lighting. The day after the work had been completed, a gas leak in room 217 was ignited when a maid entered it with a lit candle, which resulted in her being seriously injured and a large portion of the structure being damaged. The owner paid for the maid's medical care and promoted her to head maid when the hotel reopened, but following her death in the 1950s, her spirit was said to haunt the rooms near to where the accident happened. Now known as the Stephen King Suite, it's one of the most popular ghost hunter destinations in the world. And if you're lucky, you might just meet the ghost that inspired one of the most famous scary movies ever made. Number 4. Château du Tressisson. The stunning Château du Tressisson in the Brittany region of France is thought to have been built at some point in the 14th century. It remained in the possession of the same family for the following 400 years before being transferred to new ownership. And it was after this happened, around the time of the French Revolution, that a strange story was shared by a local thief that detailed what he saw in the surrounding grounds. One night, a carriage pulled up and 2 men jumped out to dig a large hole. Next, they removed a woman in a wedding dress from the carriage and buried her alive in the pit with her bouquet, shouting that she had dishonored her family. The thief ran home and told his wife, who made him return to rescue the woman, but by that time, she was dead. If there was ever an event that would cause a soul to remain and haunt a place, then it's this, and sure enough, visitors to the chateau often report seeing a mysterious woman, dressed in white, walking through the courtyard close to where she's believed to have been buried. Number 3. Poveglia Island. Poveglia Island, which is in the Venetian Lagoon in Italy, is widely regarded as one of the most haunted places in Europe, thanks to its long and checkered history as a quarantine station, and in later years as a mental hospital. Fears of contracting the plague in the 18th century meant that incoming ships to the region had to moor at the island to make sure no one on board was sick. But this often led to completely healthy sailors coming into contact with the infected islanders and ultimately being trapped there themselves. It's thought that between 100 and 160,000 people died and were buried there. During this time, it was used for quarantine, many of whom had no signs of illness on arriving in Italy. The next use of the island as a mental hospital was equally as controversial, because it became known as a place where experiments were conducted to try and understand certain conditions and supposedly try to cure them. In reality, in any other setting, the treatments would have been considered to be torture and inhumane, and many patients died as a result of what was done to them. The island was abandoned in the 1960s and has since deteriorated, which means that not only does it feel creepy to walk around, but the ghost sightings, strange sounds, and overall sense of unease about the place means that only the hardiest of ghost hunters should ever set foot there. Number 2. La Recoleta Cemetery. Cemeteries are spooky places at the best of times, but while many might feel haunted, there's one in Buenos Aires, Argentina that definitely is. Known as La Recoleta, it's a place in the Recoleta neighborhood of the city, and several famous people have been buried there, including a number of former Argentinian presidents, Nobel Prize winners, and writers. It was the first official burial site in the city and almost feels like a town in its own right, with passageways and city blocks full of huge mausoleums. With more than 6,000 people's remains interned at the cemetery, there are quite a few stories of hauntings happening, which has led it to being known as Argentina's most haunted place. In 1902, for example, a family was distraught to find the lifeless body of their 19-year-old daughter, Rufina, with no signs of how she had died. Doctors confirmed that she was indeed dead, and it was arranged for her to be buried at La Recoleta. The night her coffin arrived, a powerful storm rolled over the city, so the ceremony was delayed. But the next morning, officials found her coffin had been moved and immediately summoned the family. Fearing some jewelry had been robbed, they opened it and found her body battered and bruised and scratched marks on the lid, proving that she wasn't in fact dead and had been buried alive. By the time they found this, she had truly died, however, and she was placed in a mausoleum that's designed to look as if she's walking out through the door. To this day, visitors walking nearby her resting place recall seeing her ghost desperately trying to escape, but she's by no means the only ghost thought to be there. There's also the soul of a former caretaker, a mysterious woman in white, and a naval officer. And if you go at nighttime, you're said to be almost certain of encountering one of them. Number 1. The White House, Washington, D.C. The White House is probably the most recognizable building in the world, having first opened in 1792. But despite being the center of American democracy, it doesn't escape stories of hauntings and the appearances of ghosts. The most famous of these is the specter of Abraham Lincoln, who's often remembered as one of the greatest presidents, but had his life cut short in 1865 by assassination. He was midway through his second term and hadn't come close to finishing what he had set out to do, so it makes sense his soul decided to stay around and see it finished. Several subsequent presidents, their families, and White House staffers have gone on record to say that they have an encounter with this ghost, including Lyndon Johnson, Theodore Roosevelt, and even Winston Churchill during a visit. The last sighting supposedly happened in the 1980s, but this isn't the only specter that's believed to haunt the building. There have also been reports of the apparition of his son, who died of typhoid in the White House when he was 11, and several other people who are thought to have been slaves or servants of the building. And with sightings being so frequent and reported by reliable sources, it must make it one of the most haunted places on Earth. Subscribe to Top 5s for more and check out some of our other popular videos.